Dr. Arnon Krongrad. I'm really excited for this conversation. After reading about you, why don't we start off with kind of your story?
I joined my first house call when I was 6 years old. I was taken on it by my father, who was a medical doctor. My mother was a nurse. So doctor, nurse, me, house call. That's the beginning. 6 years old, get in the car. This guy's having chest pain. Let's go. Message received then was, you're a doctor. It means you got to serve. And you can't serve if you stay in bed. You got to get up and do something for somebody. So that was kind of the subliminal message. In the years since then, and it's been decades, it's all kind of woven around this idea that you're there to help somebody with a problem, in that case, chest pain. But it's the same story again and again. So in 1981, just by way of illustration, I worked in a clinic on an island in Lake Victoria. There was no electricity. We did have running water, but the clinic was the only structure on the island that had running water. We didn't have x-rays, we didn't have anything. So we had a pharmacy, we had sick people. I remember people coming in with cholera, for example. I ran a nutrition clinic for kids with protein undernutrition, which was stupid because we were on a lake with lots of fish in it. But the education, the missing piece there was the knowledge that the moms didn't have. So it was my job to teach them and to help the kids recover. But everything flows from that. Everything flows from this very simple embodiment of doctoring, patient and physician. Now, the problem is distraction and confusion, and we're going to get to that repeatedly in our story. And what I'm referring to here is third parties who aren't either the doctor or the patient and who have their own agendas. Patients' welfare, not necessarily the number one priority for those third parties. And I'm referring, of course, to financial institutions. They call themselves healthcare companies, but they're banks, right? They're the insurance companies. You've got electronic medical records, and on and on and on. The government, professional associations. But I think what got burned into me hard from the very beginning, and it is still just everything that I am, is that this ultimately is about the man or the kid or the woman sitting across from you and helping that person, to achieve a health goal, a functional goal of some sort. So I've done basic research. I've done clinical research. I'm the guy who introduced laparoscopic prostate cancer surgery, what they call robotics. So I'm the guy behind that one. But it's all the same story. And, even when I think of what you might call a highly technical art, right? The art of taking out a prostate, which is technical, with new technology as we introduced it. It was still about the very fundamental principle of first do no harm, help the patient. In this case, less bleeding and less pain. It's the same story.
Reading a little of your biography and, being trained at Columbia and all these things, what brought you to Africa? What was the draw?
Well, there was a patient who needed me. Why did I go on that house call? Because, it's what you do. You get up and go and you do, right? I mean, I'm simplifying it a little bit, right? I'm maybe putting a bit too much of a socially redeemable sort of face on it. The fact is that in addition to being a doctor, I'm just a man, right? I want to be healthy. I want to have adventures. I want to, contribute. I'm only satisfied. I'm only happy when I'm trying to do something. I don't always succeed, but if I'm not even trying, accomplishing, I'm not satisfied. This was kind of part of that. It was my first of 2 times in Africa, and it was absolutely very much an adventure for me.
So what have you discovered about medicine today versus how you see what medicine needs to be or should be for that person sitting across from you?
Well, so with your permission, I'd like to broaden
Please do.
broaden the look, because there are 2 faces to this. One is the medical care and one is the health. They get conflated, they get confused, but it's important not to. So I went to medical school, which means that I learned how to treat medical problems, cancer, depression, all kinds. But the other side of all that, and I began to tease apart that distinction a minute ago. I'm not only a trained doctor, I am a man. And as a man, I don't want to need a doctor. I don't want to have depression or cancer. I want to be healthy. In a way, what we've started to build over the last 7 years, not formally in any way, but from a functional point of view, I went to medical school. Well, this is a health school. This asks a very different question. This asks not which chemotherapeutic should you be applying to this patient with multiple myeloma. This asks, how do I not get multiple myeloma? Can we start with that, please?
Yeah.
And that has my interest. It's an incredible experience because however much I thought I may have known, what I'm learning with this new chapter is how little I know and how little science knows. I mean, we think we're smart, right? We have mitochondria, we have antioxidants, we have cold plunges and blah, blah, blah. Let me ask you a question. If you have a cat, if you're a cat owner, your risk of schizophrenia is 125% higher than if you don't have a cat. Explain that to me. You can't. We don't know.
I got nothing.
Right. I give you another one. Birds are more afraid of women than they are afraid of men. We don't know anything. Okay? And if you allow yourself, if you admit to yourself that you know nothing, then an air of humility prevails, and that's where I think wisdom starts to creep in. Doesn't mean it floods in. It creeps in. It takes time. It's a long path if you really want to learn, if you want to go through, reach the highest levels of wisdom, transcendent wisdom. It's going to take you time. You can't do it overnight.
I think it's so interesting, the idea of, men, especially men maybe in our age group who've been trained from young ages of, don't show vulnerability, achieve, only success is important. Whatever these lessons are that are kind of inbred in us, and that humility is seemingly is rarely part of that equation of learning. So how do we find that humility? Where do we start?
Well, one thing you could do is join us and realize how little you know. You want to get banged on the head with you know nothing? Take the questionnaire that's on my website. If you go to worldofez.com, there's a page there called Test Your Knowledge. Give you just a quick example, okay? I'll give you a multiple choice. The stomach acid of the human, the pH, okay? The stomach acid of the human is most like that of the zebra, leopard, colobus monkey, or vulture. Okay. All right. So you don't know, and you admit it.
Not a clue.
You're saying, not a clue. Okay.
Not a
fine.
clue.
Is there any value in knowing that? Is there any value in understanding? What can you infer if you can actually trace that to its factual conclusion? I mean, these things are known. We know what the man's stomach pH is, and we know what the stomach pH of those animals. Who are we like? I mean, the monkey, the leopard, zebra, the vulture. If you know that, then you can begin to draw inferences about diet, for example. Who are we most like from a dietary perspective? That's what the stomach ties in.
So would that be the monkey?
Why did you choose the monkey?
Well, there's always been the belief that we have ascended from the apes.
Right. So the answer begs the question of whether or not that's actually true. Now, I specified I gave you a very specific monkey. I said the colobus monkey, okay? And the colobus monkey is an herbivore. It eats, fruit, for example. Is man a fruitarian? What happens when man eats only fruit? Do you know?
I have to imagine that without protein, we have a problem.
Okay. So one more place where you're not sure, okay? But we can draw an illustration, maybe from Steve Jobs, but more immediately from Ashton Kutcher, played him in a movie, and in order to get in character, he ate nothing but fruit for a while until he got pancreatitis. Okay, man is not a fruitarian. Man pretends to be here and there, but man is not. Okay, the zebra would be something similar. Now the leopard might come in a little bit closer, right? Because we eat things that the leopards eat. But the answer is the vulture. The vulture has a very low stomach pH. So does man, a very lower than the cats. What does the vulture eat? It scavenges carcasses. It doesn't hunt like the leopard. It gets the meat later when it's full of grubs and bacteria and whatever else is grown in there, okay? The implication there is that man, in its evolution, went through a phase where that's what it ate, which might explain also why man is an endurance runner and not a bodybuilder by nature, for which there's tons of evidence that we are far more endurance runners than we are bodybuilders. When you begin to look at the world through these sorts of first principle observations and you begin to draw inferences, you begin to, and not just that, there's a lot of other stuff that we do. I'm just giving you these as illustrations, but when you do that, you begin to understand what your optimal biology appears to be, okay? And it's important here that you put politics and popularity aside, right? Because you may be popular by saying, man is a vegan, okay? That's simply not what the facts support, okay? And as soon as you begin to align with what you probably are based on the kinds of data that we're talking about, lots of others, you may then align your biology to what you're supposed to be and thereby become healthier.
So, and you mentioned what we're doing, and you talked about as, why don't we kind of drift in that direction and talk about what you've created and what you're trying to do with that, what you're trying to bring to the world.
Let me put a slightly different spin on it, if you'll allow me.
Sure.
What I created, at one point I had a business card that said founder of EZ. Somebody introduced me as the founder of EZ, as if it's a startup, as if it's a business, something along those lines. But I thought about it, and it's actually the other way. EZ founded me. Here's what I mean. This whole thing is the result of a mundane event, call it an accident, if you will. Remember the carefree days before the pandemic when we thought the world was good and the government loved us and all of that? I was screwing around in my kitchen trying to figure out what to do with goat meat. It was an existential moment, like, what's my relationship to goat meat? I initially bought a butcher's box from a guy who turned his landscaping goats into dinner, basically. And it was not good. If you're going to buy goat meat, I think landscapers are not the goats you want to be eating. Okay, they're not good. But I found some much better quality stuff. I got an earful from Larry at Shepherd Song in Wisconsin about, you want Namibian goats, not Angora, not, cashmere, not dairy goats, it's Boer goats. I'm like, okay, Boer goats, got it, Namibian. And then they got to be fed alfalfa and a butcher, the whole thing. So I bought that.
A deep dive into goats.
Larry will give you as much time as you want on goat meat and how to pick it. And the stuff was good. Okay, so I made something and it came out great. And I was surprised, frankly. So I texted a friend of mine and was like, hey, look what I did. Well, that started a conversation about goat meat and food and recipes. I was reading a book about food politics in the U.S. at the time. And so we started talking about food politics and corruption in the food industry. It was just a bunch of friends yakking it up, okay? But then the pandemic hit us. And the conversation shifted to lockdowns, depression, immunity, social distancing, all the stuff we had to deal with, masking, all that stuff. And I was the only doctor in the group. I was the oldest member of that group, so I was the wise Yoda that they all turned to. And I started to teach them a little bit about immunity, stressing things like sleep, for example. I think in retrospective, if the president had gone on TV and instead of saying, social distance, don't kiss your grandma, he would have said, eat eggs and take a nap, I think we all would have been a lot better off, frankly. Anyway, so we started talking, and then it evolved. It had a life of its own, and I got swept into it along with my friends. Eventually, I wound up writing analyses into the group. It was a WhatsApp chat. And it developed its own rhythm. And 4 years into it, plus minus, I realized that people had gathered. I was kind of oblivious. I didn't care. I was writing this stuff for myself. Right? I mean, here's the metaphor. The Titanic is sinking. I don't have either the interest or the ability to save the Titanic. And by the Titanic, I mean the government, the FDA, the universities.
Sure.
We got problems with these people, okay? I do. And I didn't think I had the means to fix any of them. But I thought I might be able to build a lifeboat. And that's what I was doing. And on that lifeboat, there are two things you got to do. You got to do the things you got to do, like go to sleep. And you got to avoid the things you got to avoid doing, like taking certain mRNA plus DNA biologicals and lots of other things that you got to watch for. And it turned out that a lot of people, this came to me later, I didn't know it at the time, didn't think about it. A lot of people are, at this point, skeptical. They don't believe every guy on TikTok. They're doubtful. There's conflicts of interest, there's corruption, there's dishonesty, there's all of those things. And they are searching for a source that is both credible and has integrity. So knows what it's talking about and is honest. And apparently they found that with me. That's why they're there. I mean, there's other reasons. I don't have any conflicts of interest. That goes to integrity. I'm not selling them anything as part of that group. And they point that out. That's important to them. And they're there for entertainment value, too, because I always got stories and I always got jokes and they're always laughing. But fundamentally, it's about something that grew itself. I did not design this.
So the purpose of this community
Mm-hmm.
of thinkers, of questioners,
Hmm?
what are you trying to do with it? What is it trying to become? Or is it just there and that's it?
I am but a cork floating on the river of life, okay? I will let you know when I eddy out somewhere, okay? I don't know. I don't know, okay? When I sent that text message about a recipe, I didn't know that you and I would be having this conversation. There would be 300 people in this group. Okay, so what's going to happen 7 years from now? I don't know. But I'll tell you what we are trying to achieve at the individual level, the men, the women, what we're there for. And it's essentially one thing, and that thing is functional supremacy. We want to be as functional as possible. We want maximum physical, cognitive, and emotional function. This isn't wellness. This isn't longevity. This isn't biohacking. It's functional supremacy. And one of the things that differentiates it is our stuff is measurable. When we think about longevity clinic, longevity doctor, longevity seminar, how many of these longevity people have actually measured how long their acolytes live? Not one. It's just a word.
Oh, we were in Florida this past winter and walking, and we just passed one longevity clinic after the next.
But what's longevity about it? They're selling you biomarkers, blood tests. And none of these people has ever measured longevity, let alone proved that what he's doing leads to longer longevity. Okay? Not one. Not one. Nobody's measuring time to death. It's not happening. Give you a simple example. I want to live, let's say, 5 years longer. Am I better off doing 5 push-ups a day or walking 5,000 steps a day? No clue. We don't know. Nobody's measuring. Nobody's looking at longevity. People are just saying longevity, but what they're actually practicing is blood test medicine, not longevity medicine. Anyway, we don't do any of those things. We talk about function. So when you ask me about my physical, can I measure? Yeah, I can measure how many push-ups I can do. That's easy. I can measure whether or not I can remember where I left my keys. That's cognitive function. That's memory. These are measurable things. So I want to maximize mine. In my case, and I hope in most of my members' cases, we align those objectives with a definable personal goal. And our goals are personal. We have different ones. So mine, for example, I would like to hike the Otter Trail. It's in South Africa. I'd like to hike it on March 14th, 2074. So that's 48 years from now. If I'm to do that, I'm going to need physical, cognitive, and I would argue emotional function too. I got to be able to walk it. I got to remember where it is, right? If I don't have cognitive function, I'm not even going to know where the trail is. So I'm not going to walk it. And then the question becomes, how do I do that? What do I need to do and what do I need to avoid doing? So at the individual level, my members, I think all have sort of at least tacitly accepted that that's what we're trying to do, that we're not biohackers. We're not any of those things. And evolution it's a work in progress. I mean, I'm getting invitations now to, consider aligning this with municipal efforts here in Miami to improve people's wealth. Okay, well, it's a knowledge base and it can be syndicated. We're adding events. So, for example, in November, we're doing it's the inaugural expedition. We're going into the Chihuahuan Desert. And the entire purpose of that is to really reinforce a lot of the principles that we've been talking about. So, is man an endurance runner or a bodybuilder? You know, what we just discussed. Well, we've looked at the Apache, for example. The Apache were unbelievable endurance runners. That's how they escaped the American cavalry. You know, that they'd go to sleep, the cavalry, and the Apaches would be 90 miles away in the morning. That's just one illustration of man as an endurance runner. There are lots of examples. So we're going to be in the land of the Apache. We're going to be land other indigenous peoples who behave differently from the Apache. We're also going to be in a place where you can experience silence. Silence is elusive. It's very hard to find in the modern world. Like no AC humming, I mean, nothing. We don't have that. And in that world, we're going to revisit a lot of the learning we've done about circadian biology, the sleep patterns of pre-industrial man, what it's meant to introduce electricity into certain communities, what it's done to sleep, to education, to focus. So we're introducing events. Now, our events are different, right? I'm not asking you to go to a biohacking convention at the Hilton. That's not what we do. We get out, we're at a different level.
When you talk about each individual has their own goals of this functional supremacy, how does one look at all those aspects of life, whether it's physical, mental, cognitive, emotional, and plan a flag? Where do you start?
I would recommend starting with a goal like mine. 48 years from now, I'm going to walk these 20 miles and then work backwards from there. But look, no matter where you plant your flag, maybe you want 10 years from now to be able to get out of the pool without using the ladder. Okay, maybe that's your goal. You're still going to need those three things. Well, I don't know that you need emotional function, but you need physical and cognitive function. When you build physical and cognitive function, your mood tends to get better too, as a rule. But I would go for all three. And once you work backwards like that, you understand that the dependent variables, so to speak, are those three. Then you begin to ask, what are the things that determine those? Here it's theoretically the answer is very simple. What determines those? It gets complicated only because the modern world has complicated it.
With all this confluence of, I'll say, information, misinformation, how does one sort through, this immense amount of stuff that's coming at us that says we need X, we need Y, we need to do this, we need to do that, to find a place to start with a level of confidence or a level of feeling like this feels like the right place to start for me, because you have to undo a lot of thinking or a lot of belief.
You're going to have to decide at one point, and it's an individual decision, if you want to see health as simple or complicated. If you want to see it as complicated, you'll have plenty of people to help you. They'll tell you all about your mitochondria and pathways and molecules. I mean, there's peptides. There's no end to it. It's infinite. Most people who I speak with, outside of biohacking conventions, I mean regular people who don't go to biohacking conventions, that's the last thing they want. All they really want is to be healthy. That's it. They want maximum health, minimal noise. Not what we have today, which is minimal health with maximal noise, okay? So they don't want to hear from Kennedy. They don't want to hear from Fauci. They don't want to hear from Blue Cross or the FDA or the CDC or the biohackers or what I call the shirtless wonders of Instagram. These are all these 50-year-old men who lost some weight, took off their shirt, did a selfie, and are there to talk to you about your triglycerides, okay? They don't want to hear from these people. They just want to be healthy. That's it. So can you give me a recipe for that? And the answer is, I can. We can make it very, very, very simple. So if you want 3 bullet points, don't be fat, don't be sedentary, and don't be sleepy. That'll get you 90% of where you need to go. You want it in 1 bullet point? I can dumb it down even more. Listen to the government, do the opposite. There you go. You're welcome. That's all there is to it. And then people go, well, what about technology? I want a Fitbit, and I want a device, and I want a special infrared bed that I can sleep in the afternoon. And I'm going to get a pen because I'm going to give you the three things you need, the three technologies you need if you want to be healthy, okay? Food, gravity, and a pillow. That's it. If you have food, without food, you're not going to be healthy. You got to have food. Gravity, you can go for a walk. You can do push-ups. You can do squats. You can hang off a tree. Okay, so you need a tree. Okay, add a fourth. I mean, gravity and a tree if you want to do pull-ups. And a pillow. That's all you need. Those are the technologies. Nobody's selling it to you because they don't profit. But that's the reality. Now, are there nuances? Of course. If you want to be, if you want to go to the Olympics for the 100-meter dash, we're going to have to talk about more than just gravity. You have to talk about how much and what to do. But that's not what we're here for. Okay? We're not there for athletic, maximal athletic performance. We're there for normal people who just want to hike the Otter Trail 48 years from now. Okay? With minimal effort and minimal noise.
So when we talk about food, well, there's everything from, McDonald's to, curated alfalfa sprouts and whatever. So it just runs the gamut. And where do you start with?
Start with what your great-grandparents ate. It's not complicated.
A pastrami sandwich?
Is that what they ate?
Of course they did.
Yeah.
And a kreplach. I mean, what are you talking about?
Yeah, a pastrami sandwich would probably be really good for you, better than the alfalfa sprouts. But again, we go back to the stomach pH. I use that symbolically. Ask the question, what are we? Let's use height as a proxy for nutrition, okay? For protein quality, for nutrition, and so on. The people in Holland are extremely tall. They live on tons of cheese and dairy. Holland, the Netherlands is very good for that. Lots of other examples. When the Europeans came to the Great Plains in the United States, they were on average 5'6", give or take. By contrast, the Cheyenne, the Sioux, the Comanche, they were 6 feet tall. The difference was the diet. Okay? The Indians ate meat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They ate buffalo. Okay? So you start to look at stuff like that, and there's modern data. There's a great study out of India that I like where the guy compared the diets of the railway workers of northern India with southern India, where the diets were very, very different. The people in the north ate lots of ghee and butter and yogurt, lots of milk products, dairy products, and their health was substantially better. Now, I'm only talking about adults. If you want to talk about childhood nutrition, there's plenty to talk about there, too. And this is what we do. So now, look, I told you, don't be fat, don't be sedentary, don't be sleepy. Now the nuances creep in because somebody's trying to sell you all the things that you mentioned. And the question you're asking, what am I supposed to eat? Well, look to your biology. Now, the people who ate pastrami 100 years ago ate it in a food environment that's different from ours, right? They didn't have soybean oil. They didn't have canola oil. There were a lot of differences.
I think of some of the food my grandmother used to make, like today people would be, running out of the rooms with their heads on fire.
Yeah, I know. But look at
and she lived to 97.
Obviously, there's a menu that we've shared on in the group. It comes from the Knickerbocker Hotel in New York City, where the fancy schmancy people used to go after the theater. And you look at the menu and what they ate, it was all animals. It was grouse and pheasant and beef and everything was that with gravy. There was no obesity. There was no diabetes. There was none of that stuff. So we've gotten the message completely wrong. And there's, in fact, been a sustained war on meat and dairy going back to at least 1945. So I'll tell you what I think was the opening shot against meat. In 1945, the town of Crossroads lost a third of its people. They died. 1/3. Do you know what killed a third of Crossroads? Yeah. It was milk. Milk killed a third of this town. There's only one problem with that story. Crossroads never existed. It was fiction. The whole thing was fiction. but it was published in a magazine called Coronet, and it was picked up by Reader's Digest. So the whole country basically heard that milk killed a third of this town. That was the opening shot.
And it was a complete bullshit.
It was fiction. They made it up. It was a story. But they didn't bother to tell anybody. Just like when Hegstedt and Stair wrote an article vilifying meat in the New England Journal of Medicine. These are Harvard nutritionists. What they neglected to do was inform the readership that they had been paid by the sugar industry to write that. Okay, so there's lots of examples of pure fiction being used to drive people away from traditional foods like meat and milk and butter, all those things. Look, if you look at the longest lived populations on Earth, the Icelandics, the Irish, and the Okinawans, okay? Seal, butter, and pork. Those are the diets. This is man's natural diet. It's not complicated.
There's just such a flood of misinformation that I think people are afraid to swim against the tide because they don't know what's true. I mean, you said it yourself that there's that level of skepticism.
Well, but here's the thing. If you want to go with the tide, you better be prepared for where the tide is taking you. Put another way, political correctness, your biology doesn't care. Okay? You can scream and yell, let's save the planet, all you want. But your brain still needs vitamin B12. Your biology is your biology. If you want to sacrifice that because you can feel some sort of virtuous joy inside, that's on you. If you think that being vegan is the way to go, okay, and you're going to save the planet, then you're willing to ignore facts like the olive oil industry kills millions of songbirds every year to harvest the olives that the vegans want to eat. It's not just vegans, but you get my point, right? Political correctness and ideology are irrelevant to our quest. Our quest is free of politics and popularity. We're not there for that.
So, since you've got this amazing goal for how many years hence? 48 years hence. Share with us a typical day for you. What do you eat? What do you do? What keeps you from moving? What keeps you going? What does it look like?
Curiosity keeps me going. I read all the time. I read constantly. I feed off the energy of the group. I mean, I didn't in the beginning. It was simply, I was writing for myself, but it's evolved. And now I feel the other people with me. They get all excited. We're going to go into the land of the Apache and we're going to study X, Y, and Z. That's fun. Kind of like the Africa thing I mentioned before. That keeps me going as much as anything. The wonder of what's around the corner that I didn't know. I'll give you an example of something that just really entertained me, okay? The flu seasons come and go, right? They come and they go. Flu seasons are perfectly correlated to solar flares. Okay, they're correlated to celestial events. Okay? I didn't know that until about a year ago when I first read it. Now, the man who discovered it, this guy was a country doctor in England, just out in the boonies somewhere, and he's the guy who discovered this correlation. I mean, what business does this guy have studying celestial events in flu season? But he made it his business. He also discovered stuff about the virus that causes shingles. I mean, this guy became a legit epidemiologist, okay? Where does his inspiration come from? His inspiration comes from a book his wife gave him, his third wife gave him, by another country epidemiologist whose name was William Pickles, okay? Now, I had always thought that Mr. Pickles was the name of your neighbor's cat. Hello, Mr. Pickles, right? That's what it sounds like to me. But no, Mr. Pickles, William Pickles, was a famous country epidemiologist, whatever that is, because I'd never heard of that before either. And disambiguation, never confuse that William Pickles with the William Pickles who was a captain in the Continental Navy in the Revolution, who was murdered by a bunch of Italian sailors in Philadelphia, for which they hung Now, what does that have to do with your quest for functional supremacy and your ability to walk 48 years from now? Directly, very little, if anything. I just find it incredibly hilarious. And the quest for knowledge is full of characters and stories, so it's entertaining at a personal level as you go. Whether or not this can actually help you understand how to improve your own biology, I would argue it probably does, as we consider things like immunity, for example, right? When you start thinking about, the flu vaccine, for example, it kind of leads into that conversation, and that's obviously something we do talk about. So what keeps me going is it's entertaining. I mean, it's phenomenal.
What does your diet look like? What does your exercise look like? What are the things that you do that support your goal?
I'm a lifelong athlete. I've done a bunch of different sports, most consistently swimming. I was a competitive swimmer in New Jersey, among other places. But these days, I'm more of a hybrid athlete. I do other sports. I practice Japanese jiu-jitsu, not the Brazilian. I lift weights twice a week at home. I don't like gyms because I don't like trying to figure out who moved the dumbbell and where's the dumbbell. That's just not for me. So I have a home gym. I do resistance training twice a week for about 45 minutes, and I do a lot of walking and running. So in total per week, I'm at around 10 to 12 hours a week of exercise of different kinds.
Great. And a typical diet for you that supports this goal?
Low carb. I'm not carnivore, but I'm relatively low carb. I try to make my food products grass fed. There's a marked difference in the fatty acid composition between grass and grain fed. Actually, one of our members did his doctorate degree at the University of Utah looking at those differences. 180 pages of phenomenal data and graphs and things. I mean, this guy pulled out meat from frozen mammoth and looked at the fatty acid composition. But the thing that really struck me was the difference between grain-fed beef and grass-fed beef, where the grain-fed was just much worse for you than the grass-fed. The other thing that I would stress, just because it's so simple and so often neglected, is sleep. Okay, my members complain about exhaustion and this and that. You know what? Going to bed at 9 o'clock every day will fix probably at least half of that stuff. And they don't. They're modern people. They've got cell phones and businesses and networking events. I tell them all these wellness events are actually bad for your wellness. Stop going to them. That's true.
Great. That's hilarious. Yeah. So if people are curious about you, about Ez, which I've learned is the Hebrew word for goat, which I think is very cool. What can they look for? What can they look at? What should they be thinking about in terms of this exploration into what you're doing and why and how it might fit for them?
Well, they can consider it as a possible tool in their explorations, in particular if they're after what we're after, which is better function, functional supremacy. If they're looking for noise, this is not the place. If you want to go to a rave with Brian Johnson, this is not the place. On the other hand, if you want a bunch of like-minded men and women who want it gradual, want it without this constant commercial conflict of interest that they got to watch for, if you want it simple, food, gravity, pillow, I mean, that's the simplicity you're looking for. This is the place for you. Now, you're going to get it with nuance. If you want transcendent wisdom, it's going to have to be a little bit more than the super simple way that I frame this. But we're not going to drown you in it. I mean, you're not going to get a 3-hour lecture on triglycerides. That's just not what we do. We touch on triglycerides. You're going to know stuff about that. But we spoon feed it to you in a way that's actually, I think, downright enjoyable. Okay, so it's knowledge and entertainment and friendship and adventure. And by the way, I'm looking to do an expedition, hopefully the next year, to Tanzania. There's a guy out there who's studying the microbiome of the mummies that he found in Tanzania. I'm like, okay, you go to the biohacking convention at the Sheraton. I'll be out in Tanzania with mud on my fingers. You decide what you want.
I love it. Amazing. You have so many angles and things that make up this very long thread of yours of things that you've touched or interested in. You have a favorite story?
There's so many. A favorite story. The time I ran the Boston Marathon with a broken foot and finished. Yeah, I was in medical school. I was at a lecture. I was falling asleep. This was my normal sort of MO at the time. And my friend Eric kind of woke me up. I thought it was time to go, but it wasn't. And he said, "You wanna run Boston with me?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll run Boston with you." I didn't know he was talking about the marathon. I was like asleep. I didn't know what he was saying. Okay. He goes, and I said, "Yeah." I committed myself right there on the spot, half awake. I said, "Yeah, yeah, sure. I'll do Boston." I said, "What is it?" And he goes, "Oh, it's the marathon." I'm like, "Okay, I committed. I'll go." I said, "When is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's next week." I'm like, Okay. And I did. I ran it with him completely untrained and unprepared, but I finished. I broke my foot and I finished. And I finished because it's a challenge and I love challenges. And B, I gave my word, and Eric and I are obviously friends, to this day. I don't see him as often, but to broaden this beyond like how many push-ups you should do, I think one of the things that helps to pursue any goal, including the goal that we're talking about, is to do it with people who share your ambition and can fortify. There's a synergy. So I feed off my members, they feed off each other and off me. I'll give you an example. One of my members is a dental researcher. She's an expert on the relation between gingivitis and dementia. Okay, there's a connection there. So she's going to come out to the desert and she's going to give a campsite presentation on gingivitis. I'm like, if you're going to learn about gingivitis, is there any place better than the canyon to have that talk? Starlight, campfire, gingivitis.
That was the first thing that occurred to me, as I was picturing the canyon and the starlight, and I can't think of anything else you could pair that with. It's
So,
right there.
but this relates to the social aspect of the effort. Right? I mean, it's stupid, it's silly, but it's quirky. But for me, and probably for a lot of other people, it makes life just so much more enjoyable.
I happen to love quirky. It's kind of my jam. Uh, and I think that doing things that are really outside of what is considered the norm or the safe or the routine. Um, I
The
was
routine
having,
is the routine is so boring.
yeah, and I talk to men all the time, and there's this palpable fear of stepping outside of their comfort zone into this unknown of exploration. And you use the word curiosity. And like, if not now, when? Right? You've left you're done with your career. You've spent decades doing what you did. If you're not going to be curious, creative, interested, engaged, what is there? Why not just lie down and die now?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. That's not an option.
Yeah, exactly. So as we kind of close our conversation for today, and Dr. Krongrad, Arnon, I hope maybe you'll come back and share more stories because you're fascinating. Not to mention the Jersey connection. Uh, but I'd like to leave you, as I do with all my guests, is with the last word.
Don't complicate things. Health is actually really, really simple. Don't be fat. Don't be sedentary. Don't be sleepy. If you're not sure what I mean by that, ask somebody. If you need more nuance, ask somebody. We're available. Keep it simple.
And how can people find you? And it'll be in the show notes, but why don't you?
Well, look, my name makes it extremely easy to find me. Okay, Arnon Krongrad. I'm the only one on the planet with that name. So put me in Google, you'll find me. But I'm on LinkedIn. There's a website called worldofez.com. A WhatsApp chat is open. You can join it. Can easily add you to that or send you the link. Easy.
That's awesome. And again, I am very grateful for your time, for your wisdom, experience, and what you're bringing to the world.
To be continued.
Be continued. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's show, please give us a review on iTunes. Each review helps us get our message out to more listeners so they can begin to craft their next chapter. For more information or to get in touch, visit michaelfk.com. Until next time,